Hello, everyone. It's so good to see you all. I hope you're having amazing time. Great Saturday so far. Our sessions at Little Leaps are hosted monthly once. I'm sure you all are aware of this. And it is a platform where we invite global experts in the field of early childhood development. And these experts discuss about Montessori, positive discipline, mental and physical health, neuroscience, and child psychology. And today I am super excited to invite Chip DeLorenzo to speak on the topic setting respectful limits with dignity. Throughout the session, you put your questions in the chat, and we will try to answer as many of them as possible by the end of our conversation. But before we start our session, let me introduce Chip a bit. Chip DeLorenzo has been a Montessori educator since 1995. He is the co-author with Jane Nelson of Positive Discipline in Montessori Classroom. And as a teacher, trainer, and school consultant, Chip has worked with thousands of Montessori teachers and parents in teaching the principles and practices of positive discipline through various workshops and lectures. He is the former head of School of Damaris Cotta Montessori School,
You did it.
where he spent 20 years as a school leader and teacher. Chip holds early childhood, lower and upper elementary AMS certifications, and he has also worked extensively with Montessori adolescent students. He's father of five Montessori children, and he and his wife Kathy live in Loveland, Ohio. So, welcome, Chip. I'm so honored to have you on my platform. We were just talking about you having the experience since 1995. You have been working as a Montessori educator. So, working for several decades in positive discipline and Montessori, how did this happen? What sparked the interest for you to join this field of education?
Well, desperation. So, I always joke around that I'm a poster child for positive discipline in the Montessori classroom. I'm a firm believer in that we teach best what we have most to learn, and that's what happened to me. Midori, I didn't ever, never, I still don't even see myself as an expert in this work because it is messy work. We're never going to be perfect. And we're dealing with human relationships. So when I first started teaching, I think like a lot of us who enter into a Montessori classroom, I always say I had an armful of albums and a heart full of hope, and I was going to change the world. And then when the students came into on that first day of school, they wrecked all my dreams, right? Because I I set my classroom up beautifully. I was plans and my notebook to take notes and observations. And almost immediately, I was overwhelmed with behavioral difficulties. And I didn't even have a hard class. I only had like 12 children, and they were all, there was nothing particularly challenging other than the fact that I was brand new and I really didn't know what I was doing. And I would see these veteran teachers like my mentor, they just seemed to float into the classroom, and then the children would just magically like do what they asked them to do, and they would cooperate and they would raise their hands and they would do their work. And then those teachers, they'd leave my classroom and the children stopped doing all of those things, right? And so it was really clear to me that what the problem was, right? It wasn't the children, right? Because they knew what to do and they had the ability to do it because they would do it when my mentor came in the room. Um, and they stopped doing it when they left. So there's only one variable change in that equation, and that was me, right? So I was I look back now at my early experience in the classroom, and if I was mentoring me, I would say you better figure something out quickly because you're going to burn out in about 2 to 3 years. And that's really what would have happened to me. So I found this work through a suggestion of my mentor. And almost immediately it started to, when I came back from my first training and my first workshop, it made such a substantial difference. I always say that I in about 6 weeks, I grew about 100%. But my relationships with the children changed. But that doesn't mean that on a scale of 1 to 10, I went from a 1 to a 2, right? So that's 100%. But when you go from a 1 to a 2, you really feel it. And I still had a long way to go. But so that's really what started my journey into this work, is because I started leaving the school on a Friday afternoon happy and excited to come back on Monday morning. And I think right now in our time in this place in education and in parenting, that it's really critical that teachers enjoy that work, because I've resigned a long time ago that we're not going to get paid a lot for doing this work. I don't, maybe someday, but let's assume this is never going to be a lucrative position. If we go home at the end of the week after serving the children and we're exhausted and we don't want to go back to school on Monday morning, there are much easier ways to make a living, right? And so the rewards that we really receive are from that of serving the children, from making a difference. That's what calls us into this work. So if we get discouraged as educators in that reward from our work, I think that's where a lot of the burnout comes from right now. So that's a long answer to your short question, but that's how I found the work. And then I started writing about it. I started working with other teachers and then other schools, and little by, these things work out. And then Jane and I started doing some writing together, and she proposed us writing a book together. And the reason that we wrote the Montessori book was specifically because it needed to be tailored for what we do. When I first ran into this work, I saw quickly that the principles aligned with what we do in Montessori. But as Montessori educators, we're skeptical by nature, right? So if it hasn't been integrated seamlessly into what we do, and we have a right to be skeptical, because there's a lot of people who are saying, hey, this works for Montessori. And then you try it and you realize, no, this is not that.
Yeah.
So there's, again, a long answer to your short question, Manir. Thank you.
No, I loved your answer. In fact, I was watching some of your interviews, and there was this very beautiful quote that you spoke about, this idea of imposing punishments, actually in the name of consequences. It's punishment, but I loved the way you have phrased it, saying, how do I make my child feel worse to make them do better? So I want to understand how this issue, or how this perception can be acknowledged using positive discipline, and what can we do to make the change so that we don't have to make the child feel worse, but at the same time we are also supporting them to do better.
That's a great question. And let's just start off maybe just talking about Montessori pedagogy first, right? So if you look at the way that we just educate children, Dr. Montessori created this environment that revolves around the dignity and the respect of the child, right? She warns us about punitive responses to children, and she warns us about these deviations, which many of which she believes comes from the adult being up here and oppressing the child, and the child being down here, right? And so her answer to that oppression, which eventually, which she went so far as to say, eventually is the root of war in the world, right? It starts in childhood, right? This oppression of the child. That we have to free from that for that oppression. So she went through and designed this environment to support the development of the whole child, so that we develop naturally, rather than from the adult being up here and the child being down here. She advocated a relationship of equality, meaning dignity and respect for both the children and for the adults. So punishment is designed to make someone feel worse, with the idea that once we feel worse, we do better. But we could apply that to ourselves. I like to use adults as an example because I think this is universal. It doesn't just apply to children. And then how many of us have ever been in a workplace where it's punitive, where if you do something wrong, then there's a punitive response for that. And what are the outcomes? What does that look like in the adults? Well, they tend to shut down. They tend to only follow rules. They don't think out of the box. They're not creative. They look for other jobs, right? And children don't have that freedom. So generally, human beings don't do better when we feel worse. We tend to do worse. Yeah, and children are no different. So one of the most common questions that I get is that if the child does this, what is the consequence for that, so that they'll then do better? And it's not phrased like that. It might be, my child keeps getting up out of bed every night, and my wife and I are trying to have some peace at the end of the day, and it's really bothersome to us. We're not getting our rest. What consequence can I use to make sure that my child is going to bed at night? And so that it makes sense, because as an adult, we get frustrated when we see repeat misbehaviors. And repeat misbehaviors, that's when we're tempted to start to put in place consequences, because we've already tried a lot of things. We've tried reminding them, right? We've tried maybe even yelling, right? We've tried bribing them, right? And so we get frustrated. And so then we impose a consequence with the hope that if we impose this consequence, they're going to feel worse, and then they're not going to want to do it again. And there might be some logic to that, right? But it's just not effective. So we impose the consequence, the child feels worse, but the behavior doesn't necessarily go away, right? And then so what we do is then we impose a harsher consequence if they don't do what we want. And it becomes we start entering then into this misbehavior cycle, right? So the question comes, then what could we possibly do instead if this is not effective? And just so you know, I've tried this. And there are times where I will continue. We have one of my oldest, right, with cell phones. Right? He was misusing his cell phone. Right. So what do? We take away the cell phone. But what is that actually teaching them, right? So there's those questions. What are they learning? Are they developing lifelong skills? Are they really learning to have true cooperation and mutual respect? And so a lot of it comes back down to some of the basic elements, which we're here today to talk about, of how do we set and maintain limits, because that's what we're talking about, with dignity and respect for everybody, in a way that everyone feels on an equal playing field. Yeah.
Yeah. When you were talking about the consequences, and especially when you are reiterating the same thing over and over again, and then it leads to frustration. I totally agree. And as a parent, even I have done this, where ultimately the brain stops working, and then we start screaming or yelling at the child, not necessarily giving punishment, but definitely a point where we just lose our mind, and our voice automatically rises its decibel, right? The volume. So, when we are talking about respectful limits and boundaries, uh, what can we do? I'm sure consistency is the key in everything, but what can we do so that we do not have to go to that place where we have to, you know, either give them punishment or increase our volume? And what are the strategies as parents or an educator we can bring in our home environment or classroom environment that this kind of repetitive behavior does not irritate us? And even if it is happening, what can we do to calm ourselves down and handle it a little wisely?
Oh, there's so much there. If I get off track, rein me back in. But I think the first thing to talk about is that what are limits, right? So what are they? And essentially we put down limits to the idea is we put them down to maintain respect and harmony for everybody in the environment, right? Dr. Montessori said the limitations of my freedom, it's the impact that it has on other people. I'm paraphrasing. So for the good of the community. So that's why we basically put down limits so that everybody has a way to interact with each other harmoniously, so everybody can be treated to the best of our ability with respect. So in the classroom, that limit might be I think a very clear example is we use those work mats, right? And so for those of you who are parents, you've probably seen this and wonder what is it, why do they have this mat that's on the floor? Why wouldn't you just work on the floor? Well, the mat actually, what all it does is it identifies the limits of where the child is working so that other people aren't stepping on their work. If you see a mat on the floor, you would walk around it because it demarks the area where the child's workspace on the floor. So that would be a limit that respects the freedom of the individual to work in that spot, but it also limits the space that they have to work so that they're not taking up all of the floor space that people need to walk on, right? So it maintains the dignity and the respect of everybody in the situation. And so that's why we put limits in place in the first place. And hopefully they're not going to be arbitrary limits that just benefit one person or one party. They usually benefit everybody. The second thing is that we to understand why children actually test the limits, right? One of the mistakes that we make as adults sometimes is that we put onto children adult characteristics that they don't have, right? So Midori, if you and I were going to like make an agreement together, right? So we're going to set limits to our relationship together. So we go into business and we say, I'm going to sell the yellow toys and you sell the blue ones, right? And then you start selling I would say, hey, listen, you're selling some of my toys. Can you please stop doing that? Likely that conversation would be over. We would have to have it one time and it would be all set. But children, when we set those limits, they're not testing them to be disrespectful necessarily, right? Limits aren't limits actually until they're tested. So children learn those limits through practice and through experience, through making mistakes. Some of those mistakes might be intentional, some of them might be unintentional. When we set limits, like in the classroom or at home, maybe it's a bedtime or it's what we do after a routine that we do after dinner, we have to expect that children are going to test those limits because they want to know that we mean what we say and say what we mean, right? Because that gives them a sense of security. Children, as they build independence and as they build self-regulation, things that they're built to learn. They're going to learn those through their experience, not just through words. So if I say, hey, every night after dinner, we all take the dishes off the table and clean the table together, I can be assured that one or more of my children are going to, at some point, start to try to walk away from the table and go play. And I should expect this because, again, they're not doing that to be disrespectful necessarily. They're doing it because they want to know that if I'm going to follow through and say, mean what I say and say what I mean. In order to develop that independence, you need a sense of predictability. And the predictability that children are looking for when they test limits is the predictability of our responses, because they want to know how to navigate relationships, right? So if we respond consistently, that gives them a sense of security, because now we'll go left, we go right, they go right. If it's different every time, then somebody's got to be the boss, right? So I said, who's gonna do that? So through consistency, through actually maintaining those limits, we give children a sense of security and consistency so that when they testing, they know what they're going to run into, so that they can, in the next situation, they can self-regulate. They can regulate their own response to that situation with some predictability. And that gives them that sense of security. So what are limits? Why do children test them? That is really important to understand. And then to your question, what are some ways that we can maintain them without having to yell or to remind or to coax or to nag? So I would say this, one of the mistakes that we make so much as adults is that when it's time to maintain limits, we use far too many words. We keep talking long after our point is made. And what happens is that when we go to maintain a limit, if we do it solely through words, we open up the situation to negotiation, to manipulation, to arguments, right? And then we get frustrated, and that's when we start delivering these punitive consequences that then hurt our relationships. So, so one of the tools that I always try to teach both parents and teachers almost right out of the gate is a tool that I call the power of silence. Can I demonstrate it with you?
Yes, sure.
Okay. So would you be willing to be a misbehaving child for me?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. So let's try this. Let's do this two ways. Why don't we just assume that it's time to leave for the morning, right? It's a transition time. I've told you before, if I've told you once, I've told you 1,000 times that when it's time to leave, you have to clean up your toys before we leave, and then we have to go. Right? So I'm trying to get out the door. Now I'm going to do this twice. So the first time I'm going to do it, I'm going to try one approach, and all I want you to do is respond naturally and authentically as you would yourself as a child to me. Okay?
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
All right. All right. Be right back.
Hey, you know what? All I want to do is release.
Midori, listen,
Yeah.
we've got to go in 5 minutes. 5 minutes we have to go. So that I need you to get your stuff cleaned up, right? This is what we do every morning. I need you to get your stuff cleaned up, and then we're gonna head out the door. I'll be right back. I have to finish getting dressed. Okay, get the stuff cleaned up.
I will do that. You know what? You know what? This movie is so amazing. I just want to go with my friend. Do you want to join me?
Midori,
I'm talking to
you
my
haven't,
friend.
I know, but you haven't cleaned anything up. It's time to go.
I will. I will. I'll just finish this conversation and
But
I'll
we have to
come.
go right now. What are you going to do? This stuff is cleaned up. I told you that we need you to get the stuff cleaned up before you go. I need this stuff right now. You've got
But
right,
I'll
clean it up.
clean. But I'll clean before we go. I just need to finish this conversation with my friend,
But
please.
no. That's not important right now. Right now, what's important is we have to clean this stuff and get out of here. We're going to be late.
Okay, give me 1 minute. I'll just finish, please.
Okay, let's end scene. But this doesn't have to come to a logical conclusion. I was about to start dishing out some consequences to you, right?
Yeah.
All right. So let's give this another shot. And I'll try something else. And again, you just act naturally, and then we'll debrief and see how this went. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
Okay.
Hey, what are you doing? Shall I join you today? I'm going for this party. No.
Midori, I have to go get dressed. We're gonna leave in 5 minutes. I need you to clean up your things before we leave. I'll be right back. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So will you join me? There's a lot of fun they are having, they're calling these balloons.
Midori,
Yeah,
I noticed that your things are still on the floor.
I was just talking to my friend. Um, I'll clean it. I'll just clean it. Hmm. Yeah, I'll talk to her later. I'll go and clean. Okay.
Would you like some help?
No, I can do it by myself.
Okay. All right. So thank you. So let me just check in with you. You're the child in that first situation. What were you feeling as I was interacting with you and I was trying to get you to get out of here on time?
It's it's actually now I'm relating to it as a child because this happens quite often with my own child. And
Mhm.
yeah, now I can understand what happens when somebody continues talking. I have the window to negotiate. So I
Mhm.
was trying to enforce what I wanted to do. And I
I
was
noticed that.
seeing, yeah, and I was seeing, I was checking if it is possible. So I kept on pushing.
Yeah. And it was interesting, the more as the adult, the more that I was nagging you and trying to get you to get out the door, uh, the more worked up I got. Like I could feel I do this all the time, so I try to just be as natural as I can and I pay attention to what's going on for me. And I was getting more and more worked up.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is I think I was much more likely to misbehave myself in that situation the more worked up I got.
Yeah,
So
I felt that. I felt that if I push your buttons, it'll be easy for me to do what I wanted to do. And
you
eventually, I think as a child, when I see me as a child as well, I think somewhere we know how much punishment are we going to receive. So we kind
mhm.
of make that negotiation with ourselves. So we are okay. We kind of measure how much is acceptable, and we are fine with it if we get it as well.
Right. So I'm going to take, I know what dad's going to do in this situation. I'm going to lose some TV time later or whatever, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Now, how about the second time? What was going on for you the second time?
I felt like you had totally shut yourself, and I didn't have a window to negotiate at all.
Mhm.
And the most important thing what happens is when you are making an eye contact and not speaking at all, it feels like you mean business when you are saying this, and there is no second way. And I just can't penetrate through you, so I
Mhm.
have to just abide by what you are asking me to do.
Interesting. So I base the only thing I said to you was, Madiri, I noticed that your things are still on the floor. And
Yeah,
that's it. And then I just shut up. I didn't say anything else.
yeah,
And and yet you made all those connections that I meant business. You needed to follow through. You needed to take responsibility.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And now
Um,
that I'm doing this exercise with you, it
mhm,
makes so much sense and it is so relatable because I have a 12-year-old, and as they grow old and they are entering the teen zone, it's more of negotiation. And yes, whenever I just become quiet, I see the work happening efficiently as opposed to when I am continuously speaking. So yeah, now it's going into, yeah.
it's a this particular tool is a really important one to have in your toolbox when you have teenagers. And with my children, I've been doing this since they were little. Uh, and I just want to encourage anybody who tries it. That it's okay if your children figure out what you're doing, right? Because my kids will say, "Dad's doing that quiet thing again," right? And I don't say, and that so I just keep doing it. So I'm going to respond to Dad's doing the quiet thing again. As a matter of fact, one time I came up after doing some chores one morning, And it was in the evening actually, and the my son, who was 14 at the time, for some reason he was in my bed and he was watching television in our bedroom. And I was like, why is he in my bed? Why is he watching television? Like, there's not something that we normally did. So if you have a 14-year-old, you know the concern that I might have. If you smell them, you know what I mean? That they're not, he's in my bed. He probably hasn't washed his feet in a couple of days. And I'm like, so I just went to said, Quinn, I know that you're I noticed that you're in my bed watching TV. And I just and he said, Dad, just give me a few minutes. Why don't you go in and take a shower? Give me a few minutes. I'm just finishing up my television show. And I just said, and he said, Dad, I know what you're doing. I've been to your workshops. That's not going to work with me. I just need you to go watch it, take your shower, and I'll be out of here by the time that you get back. I've just got the 5 more minutes left in my show. Now, if you have a teenager, you know that when they say, Hey, I've only got 5 minutes left in my show, that means they're 5 minutes into a 2 hour movie, right? So there's and so I just stayed there. And eventually he threw the covers off of himself. He marched into his own bedroom and said, Next time I'm not doing it. Right. Right. And so I started using this when kids are about 2.5 to 3 years old. And I just want to let you know that there's a lot of other tools that I use. It's just, I like to teach this one when I'm working with a new audience because it tends to be very effective and the success rate is really high. And I think it demonstrates really well this idea of mutual respect. That I'm kind. I'm not like I'm not trying to be mean with this tool. I'm not. I don't know if you noticed, but I tried to have a small smile on my face, and I was trying to look at you warmly and not, like, hey, you're in big trouble. But it's also firm, right? It's also firm. I'm not going anywhere. I like to refer to that as being a soft wall. Like, there's a cement wall, and I'm going to be here to provide that limit for you to make sure that things are secure, that I'm providing the environment and the container that you need to thrive. But that cement wall has got a layer or two of pillows on it, right? That's the kindness. I'm not going to, you can run up against that wall as hard as you can and it's not going to move, but you're not going to get hurt. Yeah. And so this tool is what I call is the power of silence, or presence, warmth, and silence. And so when I interacted with you, I had all three of those things in place. I hope it came across that way. So first I was present for the follow through. So I just stayed right there. A lot of times where we can make a mistake as an adult is we maintain the limit and then we leave the premises, right? Like that's how it started. Hey, would you clean this up? And then I took off, which that is going to set up, a big opportunity for lack of follow through. But the second time when I came in, I just stayed present. I was right there for the follow through. I wasn't going anywhere until you cleaned up. But the other thing is I was warm. And what I try to do when I use this tool is I give a knowing smile. And the smile is, I know that you know that I know, and we're in this together, right? And then I'm silent. So after I give a short prompt, not a reminder, but a prompt, their stuff is on the floor, or we had an agreement, or toys, right? Just something very short. I like to use a lot of nonverbal signals. So like one of the things that happens in our house a lot is that the kids clean up the kitchen after dinner, and they'll leave food in the strainer when they're done. I've told them 1,000 times, and so I stopped telling them. And I just said to walk over to them, and I point with a smile on my face to the strainer, and then they go do it. It doesn't have to be a big deal, right? So present, warm, and then silent. Silence means that after I give the prompt, I shut up. I don't say anything after that. And if, like in that situation, if you had tried to push back and tried to say, well, it wasn't my fault, I didn't do that, or you know what I mean? Like my brother got these toys out, this is not my mess. I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to smile, give you a knowing smile. Because when you get in an argument or a negotiation, how many people does it take to be in an argument or a negotiation? So I'm going to take myself out of that situation. One of my favorite quotes from Dr. Montessori is that we use the least amount of words needed for the task, and so we're gonna implement that here, which is I'm going to use the least amount of words, and I'm going to be absolutely silent. Yeah. So hopefully folks can do that. And I do want to answer, no one's asked it yet, but I do want to ask a question that comes up a lot, which is how long do you stay present, warm, and silent? How long do you just stand there? Well, the answer is well after you feel uncomfortable. Adults, we don't like silence, right? It makes us feel uncomfortable. What's interesting, what I found is that when we start feeling uncomfortable, that's about the time we're just a few seconds away from the children actually cooperating and following through. Because you can know for sure, especially as kids get older, they're going to feel uncomfortable with that silence too. And we're not being silent to make them uncomfortable. It's just when we are silent, children begin to reflect on what they need to do. They're feeling uncomfortable because they're testing the limit at that point. They know that it's the limit, and it's a feeling of responsibility that they have. So I don't know if you felt that as we were working, but a lot of times with this tool, we'll use it'll elicit a feeling of responsibility on the side of the child, not shame or anything like that, just responsibility. And that's what we're trying to build. Yeah. That's one way to set and maintain limits, called presence, warmth, and silence.
Yeah, I love the fact it's very difficult for us to acknowledge or experience the truth that adults don't like silence. And because we don't like silence is why we have these trails and trails of negotiations. And that is where we fall under, a trap. So This is one sort of a trap. What are some other common traps that adults fall into when, they are following through with the limits?
So, so one is, keeping on talking. Another one is not inviting the children into doing problem solving, right? So one of the things we know from in the adult world is that when we solve problems together as adults, like in the workplace or in our families, the cooperation from everybody involved tends to be much higher than if there's one person that says, this is what we need to do. So if it's let's say it's a routine, again, we'll keep that context for now, because it's a common challenge that parents have all the time, right? So it's just getting out of the house on time. So that can go way differently if we invite everybody involved in the situation to do some problem solving with the understanding that, hey, we might not get it right the first time, but if we're working on it together and we continue to problem solve together, it's likely going to elicit a lot more cooperation from everybody involved. So a real great example I did this when my kids were younger, is I created routine charts for them in the morning. Right. So this is what we do. I made a chart. I stuck it on the refrigerator. You check it off, and you could just use a marker. I thought I was being very Montessori about the whole thing. And everything went great for, a week or so because it's new. It was exciting. It was new. Get to check things off with the dry erase marker. But obviously, limits aren't limits until they're tested, right? So a week and a half later, the things are starting to fall apart. The kids aren't following the routine anymore. I'm starting to get frustrated. I made this beautiful chart. The mistake that I had made, that was my chart. I made that chart, right? So, and I was hoping that the kids would just be thrilled, and maybe probably when they're grown-ups, they would give me some kind of parent achievement medal for my high levels of organization, and right, like parent of the year, something like that. But the truth is that until I started the solution to that was to bring the kids in and involve them in that. So we started doing family meetings. And we talked about, hey, we're having some difficulties with the morning routine. I set up this chart. It doesn't seem to be working. Would you guys help me to make this chart together and maybe see if we can fix what's going on? And so I learned that there were some things that they wanted to do before, some things they wanted to do, and was it perfect? No, it wasn't perfect. But the level of cooperation like doubled once they were involved, right? When it wasn't perfect, that was just another opportunity to go back and say, hey, look, I don't know, we're almost there, but it seems like what's happening is people are coming down and they haven't made their bed in the morning. And then we eat breakfast and we leave, we get out of the house. I don't have time to check the beds at that point. You've forgotten. How can we fix this? Well, let's make sure we make the bed before we eat then, right? And so we would shift it up. Again, never perfect. It's family life. The same thing happens in the classroom. But what it helped for the kids is it helped them feel like they were part of the solution. And so they're much more likely to cooperate because they owned the solution. And I'm embarrassed to say it actually helped me too, because I didn't feel so all alone. A lot of times as parents, we don't like to admit that when we take that position up here, it's a lonely position, right? And that's where the parent is saying, I do all this for you. I made these charts for you. You guys are ungrateful, right? Because we're all alone up here. So hop down, get down here in the trenches with everybody else, and let's come up with, so that doesn't mean that we're going to be children, but we're going to be a leader, but we're going to be on the same level as those we're leading. And so we come up with, so that's another common mistake that I made, I think many adults make, was not involving the children in some of the problems that occur.
Yeah, that's very true. So, wow, wonderful insights, Chip. We are left with 15 minutes
Yeah.
for this session. And if any of the audiences have any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask. I have few questions asked by parents as well. If we do not have any audience's question, then I'll ask them. Anyone? Any question?
Hi, Chip. Hi, Montessori. It's Lucy speaking.
Hi, Lucy.
Hey, Lucy.
Hi. How are you, Chip? You okay?
Great.
Apologies.
I'm great. I'm still working on my coffee. Great.
Oh, that's wonderful. Apologies for my lateness. I just got home. I'm just glad I caught a little bit of your presentation. I was just wondering, Chip, do you have because obviously, like besides being a Montessorian, I heard you talking, like about some of the positive discipline tools. I was wondering, do you have a favorite one?
The one that I first showed you, and I tell you, the reason I like that presence, warmth, and silence was because it was the first tool that I used when I discovered this work, and it was the one that actually I started to feel effective for the first time. So being present, warm, and silent, and it actually changed the way of my being in the classroom. I started handling a lot of things with just silence and with my presence. There's actually, like a few centuries ago, there was an educator who said that so many of the problems that we face in the classroom, discipline problems, can be avoided if we're just present, right? When we're present, children feel secure. And what's interesting is that you can be physically present, but if we're wrapped up in an argument and into conversation, we're not really there. We're in our head, we're checked out. And the other children, they pick up on that really quickly. And they see us kind of wound up with this child. And then that misbehavior that it actually starts to spread through the classroom. So yeah, so the presence, warmth, and silence, I thought because that wound up being the foundation for everything else that we did. So
that's wonderful. Yeah, thank you so very much, Chip. Thank you.
Thank you for asking, Lucy. Anyone else have a question? Do you have any question? You can either type in the chat box or you can unmute yourself and ask. Okay, so I'll continue with the questions that I have, and any of you, if you want to ask any question, you can just type in the chat box. So this question comes from an educator. She asks, I have a child in my class who recently fell, but seemed to cry more from emotional distress than from being physically hurt. How can I acknowledge his feelings without overemphasizing the incident?
So that's a great, boy, we could do a whole session on that, but let me just try to answer it very briefly. Validating children's feelings doesn't mean that we validate their perspective, right? Let me just say that again. When we validate a child's feelings, it does not necessarily mean we're validating their perspective. So using reflective language or reflective listening, we can tap into when the child's feelings so that they feel heard and understood and supported. And at the same time, we don't have to acknowledge that their feelings are necessarily justified for the situation, but we just validate them. As a matter of fact, when you validate somebody's feelings, one of the things that happens is that it actually helps to reintegrate your brain. Because when you're really upset like that, you're operating out of your midbrain, where your fight, flight, or freeze response is. You're not seeing clearly. You're really upset. You start to reintegrate. Your brain starts to reintegrate, and you regain access to your prefrontal cortex up here, which helps you to actually have true perspective. So it's a very counterintuitive tool. So with that child, it might sound like this. I noticed you're feeling really hurt. Tell me what happened. Where else we can make some mistakes with that situation is if we try to talk the child out of their experience, right? Then they start to get stuck in that spot because they shut down, they'll tune us out. And what they're saying by tuning us out is, you don't know what my experience is like. And they feel misunderstood and unsupported. And then they're actually likely to double down and respond even more so the next time because they don't feel seen, heard, and understood. So anyway, so using reflective listening can actually help a child gain perspective for themselves. Yeah, so let me just jump on that real quick. What you said is that if I was validating the child's, if I was validating their thoughts, I would say, "Oh my gosh, of course you're upset. You bunked your head. You must be really, really sad for bunking your head, right?" So now I am I'm validating their perspective, which might be really off, right? But if I just focus in on their feelings, their perspective usually will take care of itself over time.
Yeah. Exactly, and I think the rationality that comes only when we are actually just validating the feeling. So,
it sounds like there's something over your mic.
Is it?
Now it's clear.
It's clear?
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm what I'm saying is that when we are just validating the emotions, I think the rational mind is developed there, because when we are just empathizing or sympathizing with the child's condition, we are validating the feelings, but we are not really helping them understand what it is and how much should they need to gloat on it. You know what I'm trying to say? Otherwise, what happens is the next time they get hurt, they get a slight scratch and they will just come running to us and then start showing it, because they know that my ego will be satisfied over here, because every time I have a slightest of hurt, they come, my educator or my parent, they just listen to and they validate my feelings. And I think that kind of stops them from that progress, where they have to understand how much to uh, regulate themselves in terms of their emotions.
Right. Well, and a lot of times with that, in that particular situation, a child may, that may happen at home. They might get lots of attention, lots of focus when they get hurt, and it's coming from a good place in the parent, but it can, then that child then has to go out into the world where they might not get that same response. And one of the things we have to be careful on the school side is that we also don't, when we see that we don't become cold to that, because then the child won't see us as their support. So if we focus on validating feelings rather than validating their perspective, they'll feel supported, but we're also not going to give a lot of credence to, we're not going to say, oh, that makes sense that you feel that way. We're just going to say, oh, you feel that way. Yes, I do. Yeah. And then the ownership for their feelings lies with them, which is where it belongs, rather than on us as the adult trying to rescue them from that situation. And that's really difficult. Early on, we talked a bit about, children, people don't do better when they feel worse. And I just want to qualify that when we issue punishments, right? This sounds like it's off track, but I'm going to come back. It's very different than a punishment is very different way of feeling worse than what we call a natural consequence. So a punishment is being imposed from the outside in, right? So that is likely to elicit some negativity and an imbalance and a fracture in our relationship. A natural consequence, that's where feeling worse can actually be helpful, because if you use a natural consequence, which is you just allow something to happen, right? So you allow me to go outside without my jacket on, and I get cold. It's really clear that was because of a decision that I made, so I feel cold. But the key is that I also have the agency or the power to make a different decision to solve that problem. So the agency is very different when the agency is within the adult and it's imposed on the child than it is when a child just experiences something themselves and then they have the agency to correct it. And in that way, the locus of control remains within them, and they're actually building independence. They're actually building self-regulation through trial and through error.
So when we are talking about, the agency and the locus of control being on the child itself, how do we, give them limits without, breaking that boundary or breaking that or taking away that control from the child?
So
I'll tell you why I'm asking this question, because
go ahead.
often I have seen in my vicinity, in my friend circle and relatives, having toddlers at home, the new onset of this concept of conscious parenting or soft parenting what is happening is parents succumb to a lot of demands that children, ask for. So it's quite cold outside, and the parent knows that it's not good for the child to go without any jacket. Sometimes children, and especially the younger ones, they don't even want to wear a t-shirt. And
Yeah.
and the parents are fine with it, not because the child will experience and the cause and effect, and so the next time the child will come and ask, because the child doesn't care, but just because this is what the child wants and I must accept.
Right. So likely in that case, if they're just capitulating to the child,
Mm-hmm.
then when the child gets cold, what's the parent going to do?
They're fine with looking after the child, but not really,
Right. So,
giving them the limit of.
right. So they'll jump in and then they'll put they'll give the jacket to the child, right?
Yeah.
And so who's in charge in that situation is right. So there in that situation, it's still a vertical relationship, right? It's not a horizontal, it's a vertical relationship. But the difference is that the positions have changed. Now the child's up here, the adult is down here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not good for the child either, right? And so that's where, some of those other parenting approaches that are being advocated right now, I think they have good intentions, right? I don't deny that they have good intentions, and they're hoping to develop independence and, but in that situation where you could be both kind and firm at the same time to maintain the limits, is a child says, I want to go outside in my t-shirt. You say, fine. You can do, go ahead and do that. And so you go outside and the child gets cold. You could then, and so, well, Daddy, I want my jacket. I said, oh, where's your jacket? It's inside. Okay, I'll wait. And so now the child walks inside and gets the jacket. So you're using a natural consequence when you don't do anything, right? All the adult does is they do nothing. They allow them to do it, but you also want to allow them to repair the mistake. So the mistake the child made was they made an error in judgment about the temperature. They thought they were going to be okay. They realized they're not going to be okay. And therefore, hopefully the jacket's inside, it's hanging on a place where the child can get it. And then they can make the effort to walk inside to get their jacket and fix the situation and come back. So that leaves the adult with dignity and respect. I'm not running after the child and capitulating and putting the child up here. I'm not their servant. And I'm also not trying to control the child, right? Where you have to wear your jacket. And so that way they're learning through cause and effect. That lesson then becomes the child's lesson. It's really, really important to allow children to go through that. There's a lot of talk now about building resilience in children, but you can't build resilience if you never have adversity, right? So in the first scenario you talked about, the adult is trying to take away all the adversity from the child. And in 10 years, they're going to wonder why they're anxious all the time, right? So it takes a lot of courage, actually, to use natural consequences and to allow your child, because it's not just your child being uncomfortable. What's interesting nowadays is that there also seems to be all over the world that there is an unwritten parenting rule, and there is peer pressure for this. And the unwritten parenting rule is, never should I ever allow my child to experience discomfort. And if they are experiencing the discomfort, I'm failing as a parent, right? And I can tell you from having used natural consequences with my own children, when you're in a public setting and your child is the only one without a jacket, and maybe the jacket's in the stroller, they can get it when they want to. You're out in out in public. And parents are looking at you like you're being neglectful, right? You're going to want to take that jacket and go make your child put it on, but that's not about the kid. That's about you, right? So you have to have some courage to do this, to allow them to experience that. Now, the limit to those kind of consequences is something that if the consequences are going to be greater than the child can handle, then obviously that would be neglectful. But if you know they're going to be fine, they're not going to let themselves freeze. They're going to put the jacket on when they need it, and you can feel confident in that. Then you can also follow through with it. So
I'll take up this last question coming from Gautam, and then we'll end our session. He asks, how do you converse to make child acknowledge a mistake so they don't repeat it? The pattern usually is child doesn't agree, and mostly deflects.
Okay. So one of the things that you can do if a child has a repeat misbehavior, and I want to maybe the person who asked the question, if you could just put in the chat box how old the child is, and that way I answer the question accurately.
Gautam, how old is the child? 10 years.
Okay. So with 10-year-old, I think one of the most potent tools that you can use is actually making agreements with the child, and that is that you simply let me first tell you, it's a tool. If you want to look this up later, it's a tool called the 4 steps for follow through. And when you see a repeat misbehavior, at a neutral time, so not when it's just occurred or when you're upset, but give it a little bit of time, and then you sit down, you have a conversation with your child, and you say, "Hey, listen, I'm feeling frustrated. Whenever we get ready to leave the house, your stuff's all over the place, and I don't like it. It's not working for me." And you explain why. And then you simply then ask the child, "What's going on for you about this problem?" And here you want to really listen to their perspective and understand that children don't have the same priorities we do, and it's okay. It doesn't mean that their priorities are appropriate for the situation. It's just that their priorities are different, right? So we listen with some understanding without making any judgments on what's important to them. And then you can simply say, "Okay, this is what's going on for me. This is what's going on for you. Let's work together to see if we can come up with a solution to this problem that works for both you and for me." That's key, for you and for me. A lot of times when people hear about the tool, especially parents, they think that what we're doing is we're being permissive, right? But when I make that agreement with my child, I'm going to make sure that agreement's going to work for me, that I feel comfortable with it. And I'm going to make sure they feel comfortable with it. It usually works very well. And you should also be prepared for the fact that children will almost always break the agreement that you make with them, right? They're not going to break it again because they're trying to drive you to drink or, to push your buttons. They're going to want to make sure that you're going to follow through with what you agreed upon. And so that's going to be a trust building moment. So when the child breaks the agreement, let's say you agree that they're going to have their stuff cleaned up by 8 o'clock, and they didn't, but at that's where you can use the presence, warmth, and silence, and just approach the child and say, "We had an agreement." Right? And just stay present, warm, and silent. The level of cooperation when you use that tool tends to go much higher because they participated in the solution, right? Now, if you use that agreement and you try to force your idea on the child, it's going to be very hard to follow through. Or if you just jump on board with some crazy idea that the child had and you don't give consideration to yourself in that situation, it's going to be hard to follow through with. So you want to make sure that when you do that both you and your child feel good about what you've come up with. And that way, when it comes time to follow through, and you will always have to follow through because they're children, they're going to test the limits, then you can just simply say, "We had an agreement," like that. And that is a tool that works. I found works really well in that situation. It's called the 4 Steps for Follow Through. You can probably find it online. You can find it in our book.
Wow.
And Midori, do you mind if I just give one plug here before we leave?
Yes, I
So I
was
just
going to ask. Yeah.
So you can find some of this information, by the way, on my website because there's a whole host of articles and blogs that are on there. You can get the information for free, and I put a link to my newsletter there. I send about a monthly newsletter that's a fairly exhaustive discussion about a particular misbehavior, and you can find that on my website. And that's all free information.
Yeah, I love reading them, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Defiance is the one that I received recently, and I was just reading about it. Please follow his website and read the articles. They are very detailed. It's not like you get, a little bit of highlight and then you have to buy a book or you have to, enroll for a course or something. They are very detailed for all of us to, follow, and you can execute it because the perspective is very deep, very insightful. So yes, I love your right. I think I was just reading about aggression in children. I was reading about that, and amazing. I just love them.
Oh, thanks, Midori.
Yeah. So thank you so much for joining us today, Chip. I'm sure all of us had amazing time with you, learning so many things. The great takeaway, especially the power of silence and being more, kind and firm at the same time, acknowledging validating the feelings and not the perspective. Some of the great takeaways. We usually miss on these things. So I think the more we read your articles, the more it'll reiterate and the more it'll settle in us. And I think we'll become better each time we are working with our children with these strategies. So thank you so much, Chip.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure talking. And you know what, Madhu, I just want to give you a compliment. It's, I do a lot of this work and you make it so easy. You're a great conversationalist. You ask really insightful questions. And I just really want to compliment you on all the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining today. And I wish you a great weekend ahead. Have a lovely time. Bye-bye. And thank you, Chip, once again. Yeah. Bye.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, Lucy.
Bye.